Uh, it's like this. So, good evening, people. Welcome to another session of the Red Lantern Analytica webinar series. With me, Vikas and Pratyush from the RLA cohort, who will help us to make sense of the topic at hand. Welcome, gentlemen. So, as we all know, China has aggressively grown in power within the 21st century. The expansionist policies have made them an important player in all the fronts of the international community. One of the most unexpected fronts where we have seen China emerge as a key player is in the Middle East or the West Asia region. When we look at the historical relationship between the mainland and the region, we can see that the approach from China towards the region has changed dramatically over the years. Under Mao Zedong, we saw China adopt a conformist approach within the Middle Eastern region against the imperialistic powers that were exercising their reign over the countries in the region. But cut to Deng Xiaoping, we saw their approach completely and dramatically change into a moderator or a diplomatically sound nation. But we have never seen the country be so heavily invested in the happenings of the region as we are witnessing it now. This aggressive approach has been accentuated, especially after the Arab Spring of 2011. Country has emerged as a key security and energy player willing to invest and partake in the politics of the players. But we can't deny that they have been involved in some important events of the region of the past, ranging from being a key player in the Iran nuclear deal, the Syrian civil war, the Sudan crisis of 1953, and so on. Taking all of this into account, my first question for Pratyush is, what role does China play within the region? Does the country play the role of stabilizer or a spoiler?
All right, so if we go back a little in history to understand whether and how China's role in this region has transformed from a stabilizer to a spoiler. Now, if we talk about the idea of
Yep.
China being a stabilizer, we have to go back a little in history. So the first Chinese contact with the West Asian region came in the 1950s when it embraced nationalist leaders like Abdul Nasser of Egypt and all the Algerian Liberation National Front. Now, they supported these anti-colonial and anti-imperialist struggles against Western powers and Israel because China somehow connected with these nations because China had also gone through a period of imperial powers, for example, the British and later the Japanese powers had occupied the Japanese region. So they did of sorts. And by the 1960s, China saw that its relations with these Western Asian nations, where they're embracing such struggles, had reached its peak in the 1960s, where it provided equipment and training to such groups in Palestine, in Eritrea, and even among the countries in the Gulf. Now, when we fast forward to 2003, the US invasion of Iraq, China was vehemently against the American invasion of Iraq, but it did capitalize on the opportunity when it came to investing and in construction, because America was already spent on the idea of occupation of Iraq, but China saw the opportunity and landed many important civil contracts in this region during that time period. If you look at how China approaches conflict within this region, it's a very ambivalent approach, if I say so. First of all, it prefers to avoid any sort of entanglements, but also is involved in managing and resolving conflicts on occasion. And when we talk about resolving conflicts on occasion, it also is a very different situation when it comes to conflict within countries where there is substantial Chinese investment and Chinese assets at risk, and in conflicts where there are no Chinese investments at all. If we take the example of happening in Syria, what was happening in Syria, China wasn't much concerned when it came to resolving conflict there. But when it came to conflict in such as the Darfur crisis in Sudan or the Iran nuclear fiasco that happened, China was very involved in such situations because it saw Iran as a key ally and had investments at stake. And in such instances, it played the role of a moderator, made sure to side with Iran and also minimize the effects of American sanctions. Also, unlike in other areas of the world where China has been very aggressive when it came to protecting its interests, for example, South China Sea, in the Middle East, it follows a very different mentality. It believes in political dialogues for resolving differences in West Asia. And it condemns Western powers when they use their military or they continuously interfere in the internal matters of these region. Because one of the cornerstones in Chinese foreign policy is that they believe in non-interference of with domestic matters of country. Now, despite the fact that China doesn't play favorites in this region, it has garnered a lot of support and has made friends unknowingly. For example, the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad had called China as a friend and hoped that they become a key financer in the post-war reconstruction. We'll talk about that later in this series. So, as China expands its footprints in this region, what's important to understand is that many of these impoverished countries are looking for investment. China, with its massive wealth, is looking to invest. But with the Corona crisis, this investment opportunity has gone down tremendously. So there's a precious few resources that is left at China's disposal, and many of these war countries are looking for that money. So they're gonna go all out in their efforts to attract this money. So when they're attracting this money, there are chances that this could lead to conflict between these countries, and this shows and this points to a fact that there is a possibility that China becomes a spoiler rather than a stabilizer in the region. Back to you, Aditya.
True. Well, yeah. So that was answered question. So Vikas, see, one of the most engaging events that has happened in the recent time is the peace plan that the Trump administration has put forward, and calling it the deal of the century. Actually, the plan has gained a lot of traction within the international community, especially from because it has completely acknowledged the two-state solution conceived by previous administrations and even Oslo. Moreover, the controversial Jordan Valley issue doesn't seem to have been solved within the plan. One of the few main points about this is that back in 2017, China had proposed a four-point peace plan to solve the issue, with Xi Jinping personally pushing forward the plan so that China can amp up its economic and energy interests on a stable region. So, how does this peace plan play into the US-China relations, especially regarding the West Asia region?
So, Aditya, as we all know that in 2020, Trump launched a much-awaited peace plan for the Israel and Palestinian conflict known as the deal of the century. But clearly, we all know that
Yeah,
the deal of century is nothing but a plan to kill the two-state solution and to help Israel to
true.
legitimize its sovereignty over the West Bank. So clearly, it goes against the earlier UN Security Council resolutions, which talks about two-state solution. So China was clearly against that
Hmm.
Trump peace plan because it violated United Nations Security Council resolution, which were being backed by the China. Secondly, if you remember in 2019, Trump has launched a conference in Bahrain known as Peace to Prosperity and invited all the countries
Uh,
around the world to invest in the Palestinian region so that they can develop themselves. But China and other countries like Russia refused to participate in that conference because they are not happy with the Trump peace plan and they are clearly opposing that plan and they are clearly in a favor of two-state solutions, which talks about the rights of the common Palestinian and recognize their rights in this land. So clearly, the Trump peace plan was failed to uphold those values, and that's why these countries are not in a favor of backing that plan.
Okay, so building on that, recently Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, visited Israel by bringing the travel apparatus in place to meet both Gantz and Netanyahu. Experts say that the visit comes on the back of rising tensions with China. So, what are your thoughts, like building upon that previous question about the US-China-Israel triangle that has been forming over the past years?
So clearly, earlier we all know that China and Israel were not very close allies, and China didn't recognize Israel until 1992. But after recognizing Israel in 1992, they had developed a very closer partnership in recent years, specifically after the 2010, because Israel is a very advanced country in a matter of research and technology. So research and development. So clearly, China
True.
needs those things. And secondly, after 2008 financial crisis, Western countries are not able to invest that much of money in this region. So clearly, for Israel, China is a big source of investment. So clearly, it is a win-win partnership between both the countries. But in recent times, especially under the Trump administration, the relation between China and America got deteriorated, and because of this, Israel has also suffered because
Yeah.
Israel was a very close security ally of the United States of America. And in recent times, Trump administration had put pressure on the Israelis to stop allowing Chinese company to invest in their region. Specifically, there are two projects. First is the Haifa port project. We all know Haifa port project.
Yeah.
Chinese companies were allowed in that port project, but Trump administration is clearly against those allowing Chinese company in the Haifa port project because they think that if you allow Chinese in these port projects, then definitely they will, under the garb of investing your country, they will carry surveillance on your assets, military assets, which were located in
Mhm.
this Haifa port, and it will be very harmful for our relations. Second is the desalination plant in Sorbok 2. So this is one of the largest desalination plant is going to be built in Israel. But earlier Chinese companies were allowed in this plant, but now after the pressure imposed by the Trump administration, Israel refused to grant a Chinese company to invest in this desalination plant project. So clearly, the pressure is being built by the Trump administration on the Israelis either to take our security or to take Chinese money. So clearly, the Israelis are taking the American security because that is much more important for them in this volatile region than the Chinese money. And we also clearly know that Trump administration is also putting pressure on its allies to pull out Huawei from its 5G network. We know that last month Britain has overturned its earlier decision to allow Huawei into their 5G networks. But the scenario of Israel is completely different because Israel, in earlier generation like in 3G, 4G, Israel didn't allow Chinese company to invest in their country. So clearly in 5G also it is not going to allow Huawei to operate in its country.
So well answered, Vikas. So moving on from Israel, we will move on to its rival nation, that is Iran. So China has, China still continues to push its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative and the Maritime Silk Route Initiative on the back of a global economic downturn caused due to the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the most eye-catching deals has been the 400 billion economic and security deal with Iran, which has seen India completely removed from the picture. With America battling with domestic turmoil, this deal seems like a bold statement being made by the Chinese. Because, as we all know, the US has been against Iran gaining any form of economic accessibility owing to the historical frictions between both the nations. So, what does this deal imply for the region and the international community, and what are the involved parties going to gain out of it?
All right. From the face of it, it's such a massive deal that it's unimaginable at many levels. And although it's a deal that spans over 25 years, it's massive nonetheless because 400 billion dollars is something huge. And if you look at if you look at it from the view of what these actors are gaining from this, so if we first look at what Iran has to gain from this massive deal, apart from this massive investment that's coming in to Iran for the period of over 25 years, this is such a solid commitment that China is willing to make with Iran. Now, a
Yeah,
country like Iran, where its economy is heavily sanctioned and it's running in tatters, this seems like such an appealing position because such commitment is what they're looking for. And apart from this investment, Iran's economy runs on oil exports, and because of the recent U.S. Sanctions, this oil production has tremendously gone down, and it has affected its economy, which has gone down by almost 9%. Now, with China as an ally, China provides a huge, massive oil market for Iran's oil to be exported. Apart from this, China has also to offer military and civilian advancement in military and civilian technology, it's something Iran is looking for to counter its enemies in the region.
yeah,
And most important of all, what Iran has to gain from this deal is China as an ally. And China is a very solid ally to have in the world stage in today's world. And this includes the fact that China is a permanent member in the UN Security Council and has a veto power with it. And for a country
yeah,
like Iran, which is always in the bad books of many Western powers and Security Council members. Having China on in its back with it is a boost towards it. And now, if you move on to look at what China has to gain from all this, the first and foremost, what China is gaining from this deal is a solid foothold in the West Asian region, and as Iran as an ally. Now, Iran has a very large military that China can have at its disposal if it comes to securing its interests in this region or protecting its
Yeah.
assets. Also, Iran sits on about 15% of OPEC's total crude oil reserves, and this is something that China can actually exploit and further its fulfill its need for oil. And one of the most interesting things that is happening right now is that fact that Iran has a very strategic position when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, why Strait of Hormuz is
Yeah.
important? Because of about 80% of entire world's oil passes through this very strategic narrow passageway, and Iran has a sizable chunk of it. And all of this 80% of oil that passes through this region, maximum of it goes to China. And China will seek to secure its oil interests by securing Iran as an ally in this very vital region. Now, if you move on from the recent $400 billion investment, China has been in this region and has been investing, and in this region that could affect its relations with the West Asian nations. The most important of all is the CPEC, that's China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Now, although it ends at Pakistan, but it has consequences that has a ripple effect of sort.
Yeah.
Now, if when completed, the CPEC will significantly enhance China's capacity to expand its economic and strategic relations with the energy-rich West Asian countries. And this transportation corridor, the CPEC is basically a transportation corridor which will enhance and substantially increase the capacity for bilateral trade between China and many of these West Asian nations and even Africa. And,
Yeah.
and as we all know, West Asia is China's largest source of oil and natural gas imports.
Of course.
And once the transport line over land is established, China can virtually cut out the entire sea route that its oil imports have to take now, because oil has to travel all the way across from the West Asian region and has to the eastern seaboard of China, where its major cities are situated, and has to pass through two vital checkpoints, choke points on the way. First is the Strait of Hormuz, and down south comes Strait of Malacca, and China can actually cut all of that out. And
True.
and now with the coming of the transportation lines, connects Western China with Pakistan, and travel by sea can obviously be cut out, and also brings China closer to many of these Western Asian nations. And now, once the Gwadar port, which is one of the most important part of the CPEC project, is established, China can obviously use it as a naval base. Now,
Yeah.
it really shouldn't come as a surprise when China does that. Now, as of now, there haven't been any official announcement by the Chinese government or by the Pakistani government of their intentions of establishing any naval assets there. But it's been noted that the Pakistani Navy has been buying land in and around the Gwadar port. Now, if you don't want to establish any naval assets in the region, why would you be buying land there?
True.
And if China does establish a naval base in this region, it will completely change the geopolitical scenario of the region, and it will
True.
change how how many of these Western Asian countries will perceive China in the future. But unlike many Western powers, China does not have any boots on ground as in the in West Asia as of now. It has resorted to arming and training many of these countries to protect its interests, and it has often criticized these Western nations when they have resorted to boots on ground. All right.
Yeah. So this showcases how much importance Iran holds as a strategic point in the West Asia. So moving on to one more country, we all know about the Lebanon economic crisis that has been going on. Facing a worsening economic crisis and with little chance of Western or oil-rich Arab countries providing assistance without substantial reforms, Lebanon's cash-strapped government is looking east, hoping to secure investments from China that could bring relief. The blast that shook Beirut recently has made the already receding economy even more vulnerable. So, how does Lebanon looking east rather than west affect the dynamics of the region? What does it say about the activities of China in the Middle East? Because can you answer this?
So we all know that Lebanon is going through a very difficult phase, and in recent time, its economic situation deteriorated further. So earlier, we all know that Gulf countries and Western countries were investing in the Lebanon, but in recent time, they had lost their influence in the Lebanon, especially because of the rise of the Hezbollah. So now, clearly, Gulf
Yeah.
countries are not investing in the Lebanon because they are concerned about the Hezbollah and how Hezbollah became a close proxy of the Iran. So
Hmm.
they had imposed a condition that until and unless you will not decrease power of Hezbollah in the Lebanon, we are not going to invest in the Lebanon. Same is the condition with the Western countries. Lebanon has asked for a IMF bailout last year, but clearly the Western countries are not happy to give money to the Lebanon because they fear that if they will give money to the Lebanon, then ultimately it can go into the hand of Hezbollah, and they are clearly targeting Hezbollah under the Iranian sanction regime. So they are clearly using every tool in their arsenal to chokehold the power of Hezbollah in this region. So clearly, they are not going to invest into this country. So clearly, and the recent explosion in the Beirut also further exacerbated the situation. So now clearly there is no country in the West or in the Gulf which is going to invest in the Lebanon. And its traditional allies like Iran don't have that much of deep pocket to invest in the Lebanon. So
Yeah.
clearly there are no other option for Lebanon than to look toward China and other countries like Qatar to have to so that they can invest there in money. So this give an opening to the China to invest in the Lebanon. Earlier, China was not a major player in the Lebanon, but clearly
Yeah.
now it had given a clear opening to the China to invest in the Lebanon. So China is using everywhere the opportunity where it can get. You were talking about the Iran and China deal. So clearly, the Chinese are investing in the Iran because they know that clearly the relation with the US has reached a very low point. So they are nothing to lose. So they are clearly investing in the Iran to counter the American influence in the region. So secondly, one important point which we all miss is that we need to wait by the November elections because the
Yeah.
Democratic
Of
administration
course.
was very close to the Iranian regime, and they had made
Yeah.
a deal with Iranian regime in 2015, and clearly Joe Biden is in favor of re-entering in the Iran nuclear deal. So if after November
Yeah.
Joe Biden came into power, then definitely the influence of the China will decrease in Iran and consequently in the Lebanon also. So we have to wait for
True.
the November elections, and things can change on the ground after the election.
Okay. That's a good
Yeah.
point. The November elections are one
Adding on to what
particularly.
Vikas said,
Yeah.
the effects of Democrats coming back to power can have tremendous effect on Iran's
Yeah.
relations with India as well. Now, Iran's relations with India relations have hit rough weather because of the advent of Mr. Trump into power. Now, if Trump hadn't pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in the first, we would have been on bad terms with Iran now, or rather, we've been forced to get rid of Iran because of the great sanctions that America to impose on us if we have trade relations. And that's that because of precisely because of that on our interests in the China are protected. But if the Democrats or Joe Biden comes back to power, that could also be seen changing in the future. Aditya?
Yeah. So, okay, like the point makes are quite valuable because we don't know what the outcome might be come November. Trump might once again come into power, but we don't know. If Biden does come into power, the whole dynamics of the West Asia region might change. That's true. So, moving on, like the Middle East is known as a region where many countries, numerous countries, have suffered from civil unrest, political infighting, and proxy wars. So the reconstruction efforts that go into each country has been quite difficult because due to the COVID-19 pandemic, each country has taken as each country's economy has taken a downturn for worse. It's quite safe to assume that. So, what, can China lead the reconstruction process that has been quite that is quite needed and required within the region?
Okay, so if we take this reconstruction project that China has been doing, and let's go country by country. I'll talk about Syria first. So traditionally, Syria has not been a strategic ally of China,
Yeah.
and China's Syria policy can be basically broken down into two aspects. And this Chinese relations with Syria has come up in the recent past, in the past 4 or 5 years, and nothing much has existed before that. China has obviously been aware of what's happening in the civil war, the war has been happening in Syria, but hasn't done much as it should have. And but now it's been taking keen interest in this, and this can be broken into two parts. First, China seeks to maintain a proper relation with Damascus to ensure to put a curb on transnational jihadist activity, and this is something that really concerns China, and it really wants to keep a check on it. And second is developing partnership to further its BRI project. Now we'll talk about that further when it comes to BRI. Now, China's diplomatic engagement on Syria has been reactive, has been cautious, and has been really pragmatic till now. Now, if we talk about reconstruction in specific in Syria, in January 2017, China to provide $30 million in humanitarian assistance for refugees and displaced persons in Syria. And this is over and above China signed an agreement under which it would deliver 16 billion US dollars in humanitarian aid. And by 2018, when the war was winding down, and it was seen that Bashar al-Assad was could secure his regime further, the Chinese President of Syria came out and said, and I quote, "It's time to focus all efforts on the development and reconstruction of Syria, and China will play a bigger role in this." So that points to the fact how interested China is in this region. And throughout the war, while US had focused on isolating Bashar and was busy blocking his reconstruction aid, China had quietly been cultivating political ties in the region. It maintained its embassy staff in Damascus, and it had been laying groundwork for the reconstruction even before the war had actually ended. And in 2017, when China had hosted the first ever trade fair on Syrian reconstruction projects and had pledged over $2 billion for the reconstruction of industrial parks in the region. And this fair China had conducted by over 1,000 Chinese firms, and with the of in this region, and the discovery of the fact that Levant can actually be an and the Levant can be actually a shortcut to the Mediterranean region, and China can actually cut off the dependency on the Suez Canal, and has also deepened the interest the Chinese have in Syria.
True. So, because I think so, there are two more countries like this which have been suffering from civil unrest for quite a long time, like Yemen and Libya. So, could you please throw some light on what the reconstruction efforts might lead to there if China gets involved?
So China can play an important role, no doubt, in the reconstruction of these countries, which had suffered from the war and other problems. So firstly, we need to understand is that after the Arab Spring was a surprise for the China also. China lost billions of dollars of investment in Libya, Yemen, and Syria. And secondly, it had to pull out more than 36,000 of its workers in this region because of the Arab Spring, the situation created because of the Arab Spring. So now China is a very pragmatic player. We all know that. So China had not taken any side in this conflict, in the civil wars, whether in Yemen, whether in Libya. So China had waited for the conflict resolution, and it would want to gain from every side. So take the example of Libya. In Libya, China was not happy with the downfall of the Gaddafi regime because Gaddafi regime was very close to China.
Yeah.
But after the downfall, China accepted the reality on the ground, and it started building relation with the new government in Libya. But after 2014, when we all know that Khalifa Haftar came into power in the eastern Libya, and he divided Libya literally into two parts, eastern Libya and the western Libya. So now after 2014, Libya is divided into two parts, and in 2019, when Khalifa Haftar launched an attack on Tripoli, the capital of the Western Libya. The fight, he clearly upped the ante. So now China is very close to the Khalifa Haftar also and to the power in the Tripoli. So China had maintained close relation with both the countries, and China considered Libya as a part of the BRI project. Secondly, Chinese companies like Huawei and GT are also investing in the telecommunication network in the Libya. So China clearly had built an alliance with both the parties in the conflict. So tomorrow, if any party clearly emerges out a winner, so China can reap benefit from that conflict. Same is the situation in Yemen. China opposed the Houthi takeover of the UN recognized government in 2014. But clearly, after the situation became clear that Houthis are not going anywhere, so they had changed their stance and they had developed closer relations with the Houthi. Now, Yemen is also part of the BRI project. So China has clearly built closer alliance with the Houthi and the UN recognized government in the Yemen. So clearly, China is also going to benefit if tomorrow conflict ends between both the parties. So China clearly in this region has put itself in a situation where it can maintain relation with both the warring party in any country. And clearly, if any party clear emerges out of winner of that conflict, like Assad in Syria, then
Yeah.
it can develop its relation further there. So clearly, China is going to invest money in this region whenever these
True.
conflict ends, like the situation in the Syria, because Syria development needs are also in reconstruction needs are also very huge. There is a requirement of more than $250 billion according to the UN estimate to the Syria for its reconstruction. So China is a player which can invest that much of money. Russia and Iran don't have that much of money to invest in the Syria. So clearly China can be a major player, but in future we have to wait whether China invest or not in this region.
True. So basically this shows that how important China has become as a player within the region, because it is involved basically in every country that is present within the region. So moving on, 3 years ago there was a certain crisis which emerged within the region known as the Gulf crisis. So basically 3 years ago, an air, land, and sea blockade was imposed on Qatar by four Arab countries: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt. They basically cut diplomatic ties and trade ties with Doha, claiming it supported terrorism and was too close to Iran. So Qatar rejected the claims, and there was no legitimate justification for the severance of relations according to it. But there has been little progress towards any sort of resolution. When we consider China's approach to it, China, as the second largest economy in the world, has its own viewpoint on what is happening in the spiraling sectarian crisis that has emerged there. So China and Qatar have a long and deep history of cooperation based on gas, consumer goods, and investment also. So basically, Qatar, as we all know, is owner of the world's second largest reserve of natural gas. So how has this blockade changed the way China is approaching the region, especially with regards to the Arab countries present within the Gulf? Furthermore, what all developments can we expect to come if China continues to support Qatar in the face of Saudi Arabia or other Arab nations?
So, so clearly, in the Gulf crisis, which started in 2017 when the other Gulf countries imposed sanctions on the Qatar and imposed blockade. So clearly, China is not happy with this situation because the situation of China and US in this conflict is very similar because both the countries are ally of all the Gulf countries. So they don't want that conflict to escalate further because China has a very close relations with the Saudi Arabia and Qatar also. So both are very
Yeah.
important for the Chinese standpoint of view. So China is importing oil from the Saudi Arabia and China is importing gas from the Qatar. So China don't want to put itself in a situation where it has to take sides. So clearly, it wants this. China wants this conflict to end as soon as possible because it is
True.
harming China's interest also, as like it is harming the interest of the United States of America. Secondly, the one important demand in this blockade imposed by the other Gulf countries on the Qatar is that Qatar closed down its Al Jazeera network. So clearly,
Yeah.
China in 2012 closed down Al Jazeera network because of its promotion of Uyghur Muslims. So clearly, there is one point of view of the Gulf countries which China is also supporting. Second major point of contention between Qatari and Chinese is in Syria. We all know that Qataris has poured money into the Syrian civil war and backed
Yeah.
different factions. So most of the factions backed by Qataris in the Syrian civil war allowed Uyghur Muslims to fight in their rank and file. So
Yeah.
clearly, China is not happy with that. And we also know that in 2018, I think, I suppose, China sent its special forces in the Syria to fight
Yeah.
against the Uyghur
2018.
Muslims,
Yeah.
to fight against the Uyghur Muslims. So clearly, Chinese interest and the Syrian interests are clearly aligning in this region also. So clearly, China don't want this conflict to escalate further and wants this conflict to end as soon as possible. And it had maintained a clear neutrality in this issue, in this conflict.
Okay. Pratyush, would you like to add on to some points? Like, it's a major issue. Which has,
Yeah. So
yeah.
when we look at
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll talk about this crisis from the perspective of China and China and Pakistan establishing the Gwadar port. Now Gwadar port becomes a very important aspect when it comes to the Gulf crisis, or even the oil diplomacy that is prevalent in this region. Now Gwadar port has become undoubtedly one of the most important aspects of Pakistan China's CPEC. It converted a 230 million US dollar loan that had given to Pakistan to develop the Gwadar airport into a grant.
Yeah.
And it further in the next year it converted a 140 million US dollar loan to an interest-free loan for the development of a 90-kilometer expressway in this region.
True.
Now the Gwadar port can have four major contributions when it comes to China's relations with West Asia with respect to the Gulf crisis and with respect to the oil diplomacy. The first, Gwadar will serve as a major transit and transshipment port for China's trade with West Asia and Africa. Up until now, it was relying on the port services provided by Dubai for no export happens when a large ship comes to the shore to the port and the goods are distributed into further smaller ships. So this needs a place of its own,
Yeah.
and that is what Gwadar will become eventually. And secondly, re-export zones and special economic zones that are being developed in the Gwadar will attract a significant amount of direct investments from Arab countries, and especially from countries like Qatar under sanctions from other Arab countries, and Qatar is a country who has lost its ability or its right to use the Dubai port service now.
Yeah.
So obviously Qatar will look towards the Gwadar port as a port
Has a leeway.
which
Yeah.
can fulfill its interest. Yes, and to add on to that, it has also invested heavily on developing food storage facilities in Gwadar port. Thirdly, China
True.
has developed a petrochemical zone in the Gwadar port. It will have a zone for storing crude oil, for storing oil and crude oil. And this is really something that interests the oil-rich Arab countries who are seeking to expand their oil business. Because America is obviously increasingly becoming oil independent, so the Arab countries are looking for newer markets. And Saudi Arabia, in fact, in 2000, way back in 2019, had already announced 10 billion in development in this region. And fourth and finally, Iran's relations with China and India can also be affected with the development of the Gwadar port. Now, with India coming under a lot of pressure from the US
Yeah.
as we're slowly backing out of the Chabahar development project, and this has
Yeah.
forced Iran to look towards China for completing the project, and that will see China in Iran being India being pushed further away from the. And Iran has also been recently cited for the fact that it may want to link the Chabahar port with the Gwadar port via a highway and natural gas pipeline, which will enhance Iran's capability to export its oil to Pakistan and further into China.
Yeah. So
Back to you,
basically,
Aditya.
what? Yeah. So as you mentioned, oil and gas diplomacy. So the Gulf crisis plays into it quite heavily. So basically, oil and gas diplomacy can be sought as like what superpowers try to achieve in order to secure the energy needs. And when we look at the US's approach, especially in the 21st century, with regards to the Middle East, we can see that most of the talks revolving around the Middle East have been disenchantment talks because they are trying to achieve self-sufficiency in their oil and gas needs. So what we can see is that there's been quite a diplomatic turnover from that. So the oil and gas diplomacy has taken quite a downturn in the 21st century. So Vikas, can you please throw some light on it because it's quite a confusing topic, to be frank.
So, so we all know that in 2014, America became oil independent, and because of the
Yeah.
cell revolution in America, it is producing so much of oil and gas. Now it can export it also. So clearly, it is the situation in the international oil and gas market has completely changed. Uh, Aditya, we all remember that after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, how the world
Yeah.
media reacted and how Western powers reacted, because at the time their oil and gas interests were so huge in this region that they cannot allow any other power to control them, any single power to control them. So clearly now
Yeah.
the situation has changed. Now America is not that much of dependent on the Middle Eastern oil and gas. So clearly it want to disengage itself from this region, and especially under the Trump, because Trump style of diplomacy is very different from earlier president. He clearly saying
True.
that why we are so much invested in this region if we don't need anything from them. So clearly he's
Hmm.
saying that it is the responsibility of China, Japan, South Korea, and countries like India, which are importing huge amount of oil and natural gas from
Yeah.
this region. So clearly it is disengaging itself from this region. So now the pressure is coming on the countries like China, India, and South Korea and Japan, which are hugely dependent on the oil and gas from this region, because these
Yeah.
are very developing countries and they are much dependent on the oil and they don't have any other source to import that much of amount of oil. So clearly China is under huge pressure now, because China want to secure its oil and natural gas supplies, as Pratyush has already mentioned that it is building Gwadar port to avoid the
Yeah.
Strait of Malacca dilemma which it is facing. So clearly China is under pressure, and now China has to invest money in this region to secure its oil and natural gas supplies. Secondly, the China, which is building closer alliance with the Iran, is also because of this issue. Because China
Yeah.
feels that Iran is a major player which can disrupt the oil supplies in this region. If tomorrow Iran went to war with the America, then clearly it can blockade the Strait of Hormuz and stop the supply of the oil from this region. So clearly, China wants to develop closer partnership with the Iran so that in the future Iran don't harm its economic interest in this region. So clearly,
True.
in this way, the situation has changed, and China is coping with the changing situation in this region.
True. So moving on from oil and gas, basically, like I'm going to quote a Chinese scholar named Adrian Zenz, one of the greatest crimes of the 21st century is being committed right in front of our eyes. We see it, yet we don't register it. I'm talking about the Uyghur Muslim crisis that has been happening in Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region, for quite some time. The Chinese Communist Party is reverting to a type of oppression and the totalitarian fear that has never been seen, especially after the Mao era, to bring down the numbers of largely Muslim Uyghurs of Xinjiang. The communists are forcing women to be sterilized or fitted with contraceptive devices. If they resist, the state finds them to join the 1 million Uyghur people and the other Muslim minorities detained in what the state defines as re education camps. One of the most pertinent questions arising out of this humanitarian calamity, it's, it's a calamity basically, is why are the Muslim states, especially in the region, staying silent over China's abuse of the Uyghurs? Pratyush, are you willing to answer that?
Yeah, so I have a very straightforward and very simple answer for this question. That China has essentially bought the silence of these Muslim nations
Yeah,
with massive amount of money. Now, if you break this down, if you look at this issue, and if you go by country, let's take Turkey for example. Now, President
yeah,
Erdogan's initial remarks, where he had condemned China's domestic conduct, completely petted out after China offered a $1 billion bailout to stabilize the country's ailing economy. If we talk about Saudi Arabia has made China its key partner and ally in its Vision 2030 development plan. And now let's talk about
Yeah.
Pakistan now. Now Pakistan it's reported that Imran Khan has refused to criticize the Chinese when it comes to the Uyghurs. Now this is something interesting. In July
Okay.
2019, a letter was signed by 37 countries, one third of them which were a Muslim majority country, and this letter was sent to the UN, which showed the support of these countries for China. And this was in response to an attempt by Western countries to block China and to sanction China on its because of its activities in Xinjiang. But one third of these
Okay.
Muslim countries they blocked this, and
Mm.
China has been trying to maintain the status quo on the surface with these countries. Last year, it officially pledged to adopt the something known as the Amman Declaration. Now, Amman Declaration is
Yeah.
something very sacred for these Arab nations. Now, this is basically what our Amman Declaration is, that it serves as one of the earliest multilateral efforts to build an intellectual response to Islamic terrorism. And this is something that China is really keen in. Uh, and China justifies its actions in Xinjiang by citing the fact that they are merely counterterrorism measures that China is taking, and this really appeals to other moderate Muslim nations who also suffering from this foe, that is Islamic extremism. And with
Yeah.
the adoption of the Amman message and along with its massive amount of money, China has essentially won the hearts and minds of these Muslim nations. And they have absolutely hijacked the idea of counterterrorism just to justify what they're doing. Now, if we look back a little, Iran had essentially issued a death sentence on Salman Rushdie
Yeah.
when his work, The Satanic Verses, had come out. A death sentence for Salman Rushdie to writing a book. But other West Asian countries also joined the bandwagon in condemning press agencies like Charlie Hebdo and other Norwegian articles where they had portrayed Muhammad in a bad light according to these Western
Yeah.
nations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
I
where are
remember. Yeah.
these so-called defenders? Where are these so-called defenders of faith when women are being forced to go undergo sterilization, when children are being torn apart from their families, when people are sent to re-education center where they are stripped of their very Muslim identity and are being force-fed communist propaganda?
So,
Back to you, Aditya.
so okay. So moving on from one controversial issue to another, it has been over a year since the Indian government basically abrogated the 370 resolution, which stripped the regions of Kashmir, Jammu, and Ladakh of the status as a state. So this has quite significant impact on our relationship with Pakistan and China also, because both of the countries have been vocal against the actions taken by the Indian administration. Moving on, Turkey has been the only country within the region which has vocally backed off or completely told against what Indian government has done within the Jammu Kashmir state. So I see the main reason why Kashmir is a big issue within the region is that it is a Muslim dominated population which lives there. And China has been using it as a leverage to actually portray itself as the most peaceful nation of all the Asian countries that are moving towards being a superpower. So, what does it do for the international community, especially within the standpoint of India, when we compare what has happened and what is going to happen? So, Vikas, can you answer this?
So after the abrogation of the Article 370 by the Indian government in 2019, four major
Yeah,
countries criticized these actions. First is the Pakistan, and we can understand why Pakistan criticized India 370
of
uh,
course. Yeah,
abrogation. And secondly, we also can expect from China that it will criticize India because China is all-weather ally of the Pakistan. But two
yeah,
countries which surprised the international community, one is the Malaysia and second is the Turkey. So clearly, these
yeah,
two countries criticized India on the Kashmir action. So clearly, why these countries criticize is very important to understand because Erdogan want to become a leader of the Islamic world. So
yeah,
clearly, he knows that Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, which were earlier the leaders of the Organization of Islamic Countries (OIC), is not going to criticize India because they are very close allies with India. So clearly,
Yeah.
Erdogan want to become a leader of the Arab Muslim world. So through these actions, he is trying to portray himself as a leader of the Arab world. Same is the situation
Yeah.
with the Malaysia. Malaysia also want to become a leader. So clearly, these two countries are criticizing India because they feel that other Muslim countries are not going to criticize India on this issue because India is so important for them. So clearly, they had a chance to criticize India and to maintain a position where they can say that they are the leader of the Islamic world. And secondly, we all know
True.
that Turkey is a very close ally of the Pakistan also. So
Yeah.
Turkey will criticize India, but India has taken very drastic action against these two countries, and it has taken a
Hmm.
leaf from the Chinese playbook. We all remember that in 2016, when Norway presented Nobel Peace Prize to Dalai Lama.
Yeah. Yeah.
China
Yeah.
cut off China cut off economic relations with the Norway, and
With the
Norway
Norway.
has
Yeah.
to go down in the no down go down in the face of pressure from the Chinese side. Same is the case with the South Korea when South Korea allowed third missile defense
Hmm.
system which it had imported from America in its
America.
territory.
Yeah.
Chinese citizens stopped buying South Korean goods. So clearly, China is a very powerful country, and no country want to antagonize China. So nobody is saying against them in the case of Uyghur Muslim or in any other issue, whether it is a Tibetan issue or the Uyghur Muslim issue. So clearly,
Yeah.
India is also doing the same here. India stopped buying palm oil from the Malaysia, and it had literally started a trade war with Malaysia. And Malaysia is a
Hmm.
very big exporter of the palm oils. So it clearly harms the Malaysian economic interest.
Yeah. Economic. Yeah.
Second, it had criticized Turkey in it for its action in the northeast Syria. We all know that Turkey is very concerned about the Kurdish rise in the
Yeah.
northeastern Syria because Kurdish,
Hmm.
with the help of American, defeated the ISIS in the
Forces.
Raqqa
Yeah.
and the other northeastern region. So after the
Hmm.
defeat of the ISIS, Kurdish became a very close partner with the American establishment. So now
Yeah.
Turkey is very concerned that if tomorrow they start the separatist movement in Turkish land, then definitely it will be very difficult for them to control because they have ally on the other side of border, which is Syria. So when Turkey
Yeah.
invaded in 2019 northeastern Syria to overthrow Kurds in the northeastern region, clearly India
Hmm.
criticized that action, and India has also refused, denied rights to certain Turkish companies to build ports and other facilities in India. So clearly, India is taking drastic action against these countries which are criticizing India's 370 action.
Okay. So I think, guys, it has been a wonderful session so far. We, I think so. Basically, we covered all the aspects of Chinese, what you can say, assertive, what you can say, expansion within the region, which most of the countries or most of the scholars never had expected beforehand. So it was a pleasure, and I hope that we will continue this webinar series in the future also. So thank you, guys.